Hi guys, and welcome back. And today we get on with painting the British infantry for the Zulu movie tribute diorama. So I've limited myself to painting about half of the other ranks, the guys lining the sandbag wall just about to break into song. And I'll have a second video, or a following video I should say, which will look at the customization of the command figures. So that'll be Chard and Bromhead, the bugler, and the other lazy sod who's leaning on his rifle. And I'll just paint the other figures in between while I'm doing those conversions. And then we'll just about have everything that we need for the video after that to be putting the diorama together, the base and making the sandbags and what have you. So let's get into it. So standard setup for the painting, I like to mount the figures on a toothpick, and in this case they were saved the indignity of a toothpick in the butthole because I could put it in their base. Now I'll be cutting off the bases ultimately when I go to mount them on the diorama, and in fact I've already cut the left foot off the base, so they're just attached by their right foot just to make it easier and hopefully minimise damage when I remove them. And all I'm doing here is spraying on Vallejo's surface primer, and that is grey, or gris as the bottle says. Oh, and if you're new to the channel, don't forget to click subscribe, and either new or old, make sure you've clicked the bell so you get notified of any new videos as they come out. So colour blocking for me is just getting the first coat of everything on, and I think I say this pretty consistently. I'm careful but not fanatical, and also conscious of the fact that these are going to be weathered to be quite dusty. The guys were in action for pretty much 2 days and certainly all throughout the night in between, so they had a pretty torrid time and they would not have been pristine, so they'll get weathered and dusted up pretty heavily, which means I'm aiming for a sort of brighter appearance for the base coat getting down, knowing that it will come right down. So it'll look pretty bright as we progress, but fundamentally it will come right down when it gets weathered and dusted and then matte coated. And given that we typically paint in greys and greens and browns and fairly muted colours, I can't tell you how much fun it was to be using some bright colours, and putting the red on was it was absolutely fantastic, to be honest. So now I'm just going to do a little bit of dry brushing on the guys just wearing the grey shirts. So this is just a lighter grey and looking to try and capture the highlights. So dry brushing is dry brushing. It's no different here than on a vehicle or an airplane or anything else. This dude looks like my first supervisor when I started work 42 years ago. Mario! now I'm doing the second pass on the uniform trousers. So I'm using the same blue, but with a little bit of black in it, just to darken it up. And then I'm taking that darkened colour, adding in a little bit of thinners, just a couple of drops. So it's a bit washy. It will still colour the higher areas, but it will also settle more into the low areas. So again, and a little bit more careful in putting this on than I would a normal wash, because I don't want it to go on any of the whites or the greys or the reds that are blocked in it already. And then give it a couple of minutes, but not till it's fully dry, and then back in with a Q-tip, and that's just to take it off the uppermost areas of the highlights. So that in itself gives you a little bit of that colour contrast and light and dark for depth. So onto the webbing now and the equipment and helmets, and using Vallejo's off-white, and just going back over now and trying to be a little bit more careful, getting good even coverage. And it was also at this point that I was really glad that I made the decision not to stick the right arms on first. It just made painting the straps and the rest of the equipment so much easier. And as you'll see towards the end, putting the right arm on later actually proved to be much easier and caused less damage than I thought it might. And just whacking a little bit of Vallejo brass on here for the helmet plaque. And what I'm using to do these really small detailed pieces of painting, so like the plaque and buttons and eyeballs and stuff like that, it's a 000 Maris. It's just a, well, relatively cheap Chinese brush that I've thinned down the bristles a little bit further to give it a slightly finer point. And that seems to work really well, and a relatively easy exercise to get the extra pointy point. So back in to have the second pass at the flesh, and that's to make sure all the little nooks and crannies are properly covered. And what I'm using here is the third generation AK acrylics, which is beige red. And beige red is my go-to base colour for all flesh tones to start with. And I tend to then look at lightening highlights with just adding a little bit of paler flesh into the same beige red, and then darkening lowlights with a little bit of maybe leather brown. But I don't go for vast contrasts, I go for very subtle contrasts. So I haven't done any of the highlighting at this stage, but that should show up hopefully further down the track. So doing the eyes is always fun, and it's hard enough on a 35th scale figure. 28mm figures, I think they're 1/56th scale. It's even more challenging. Now the mouldings on these are quite good, so most of them had reasonably defined eye sockets, if you like. And I just go in again with the off-white. It's really difficult to keep it to the exact area, so I'm not too stressed if I go outside the lines, as it were, because I think it's easier to then come back in with some diluted flesh tones and bring it back to sort of normal. And then with my 000 pointy brush, try and get the dot in the middle for the iris, and that sometimes looks good and sometimes it looks rubbish. I tend to be able to get the left eye better than the right eye. I'm not sure why that is, but most of my right eyes are wonky, so maybe there's some genetic issues with my skill set. So some more fiddly work, getting the red line down the side of the trousers on both the right and left legs. And I guess my tip here is, aside from having a good set of magnifying glasses and stop headbutting the camera, idiot, it is don't try and do everything in one pass. And I've been guilty of doing that in the past, and I guess what I've learnt from trial and error is it's just better to get the first line in place and that does two things. It gives you a bit of a guide. You're not overly stressed about how its final appearance looks, and then you can just keep going back over that line, and the paint seems to adhere within the confines of the line you want. Generally pretty happy. I had to touch this one up because I was doing it from behind the camera, so I just had to come in with some blue paint after this to thin it out a little bit, but the rest of them not too bad, I think. So with that, the vast majority of the detail painting completed, and time to start cleaning up the right arms and then trying to get a match with their left arm counterparts. So just making sure to clean the paint away from the plastic for glue adherence. As it turned out, that probably wasn't 100% necessary because I went with a super glue and then my resin UV glue as the adhesion method. But yeah, just keeping the seam lines off and making sure the joints were reasonably close. A bit of putty and paint will hide a multiplicity of sins. And then, because I wanted to paint these separately but have them fit back exactly where they should, I pre-drilled a hole through the arms. So A, I could put a cocktail stick in, which is my favourite holding device, and B, that once it was painted, then I could go through that hole with the drill. So I could insert some very thin wire like this and use that with super glue to make sure I had a solid bond. The only thing I realised that I had to be careful of was that I didn't mix the arms up once I started painting. So I'm not sure if I show it or not, but you'll see some numbered cocktail sticks which correspond to numbered men. And that worked out all right. I didn't mess that up for once. So the painting of the right arms is pretty obvious, so what I might do is give you a well-needed respite from listening to my voice, bit of gentle music in the background, and I'll come back when it's time to put the arms together. So back with the fixing of the right arm to the figure, and just using a little bit of super glue at first to get it in position. So this is the sort of gel super glue. You've got more than a couple of seconds, so you can do a little bit of adjustment, but you still have to be relatively quick. But that was mainly just to get it in position, and then to put them aside to set all of them basically overnight. Just worked a little bit of glue into any of the gaps to make sure there was good connection to both sides. And then the next day came back in with the Dremel just to drill through the existing hole in the arm into the torso so that the wire had a nice snug place to sit in. Just required a little bit of cleanup but didn't take a huge amount of paint off, but I always expected that was going to be the case. Then slip the wire in and get my cutters, find where I need to cut it and then pull it out. So I could cut it, and then I don't think I captured it, and then I just would take about a mil off the other end so it disappears completely into the hole. Roll around in the super glue so that it's fully covered, and then stick it in, as the actress said to the bishop. So heading into the home straight now, just using a little bit of the two-part epoxy putty to fill in the holes, or the gaps between the arms and the wrists as well, which I must admit I initially forgot for the couple that I had to add different hands into, and had to go back and do those, so you might see some dodgy looking photos as we go further in. Now the thing I love most about this putty is that then I can use the silicone tipped tool to smooth it down and get rid of any excess by just sort of putting a little bit of downward pressure on it, and it sort of pops out the sides, which is great. But the other thing that I really, really love about it is that if you add a little bit of water, and it doesn't need a lot, you can smooth out the putty, and you can literally smooth it out to the point where it doesn't need any sanding. So final cleanup, back in fixing up the arms where the joint is with a bit of red paint or grey paint, and then doing a little bit of highlighting with the dry brushing, and generally one last pass around the figures to make sure I haven't missed anything, because you invariably miss something, and try and minimise that as far as possible. Then hitting it up with a gloss coat in preparation for doing a little bit of oil weathering. So I've made up a wash of burnt umber, which is oil paint, and white mineral spirits, and then use my sort of soft biggish brush to dab it on, going for coverage everywhere, but also being a little bit cautious in terms of I don't want huge amounts of it to pull up, because just to sort of bring the colours down a little bit, and a little bit of dirt stain on more on the whites and in the creases, and that seemingly came out pretty well. Now at this stage I'd typically say, right, we'll go and have a look on the magic spinning wheel with final reveal and then some still photos, which hopefully you'll pick up some more of the detail. But I thought we'd linger on this picture for 1 second, because there's a couple of things that are missing that are prominent in the costumes, so the movie's interpretation of the uniforms, that are missing. And the most obvious is the shoulder tabs, the green shoulder tabs with the white border outlines, and I'll throw a picture of that up here in the corner, and also the bayonets and the scabbards. And I didn't like the scabbards that I'd ultimately made, and when I did a little bit more research I realised they weren't even looking exactly like they look in the movie, so a few of them broke off in the painting process, and I wasn't distressed about that because they'll ultimately come off altogether. So right now I'm going to introduce you to what is definitely not a tutorial, my initial efforts on learning how to use Tinkercad, which is a 3D design software package. It's a free one that you can do online, and this is all in preparation for the known Christmas present that I'm getting from my family, which is very, very excited about, my Anycubic Photon 3D printer. So the plan is to 3D print out the shoulder tabs and the bayonets, and I'll give you a little bit of footage of my 3D design skills, which are appalling at the moment, but I'm slowly getting there. And all these things will either go onto the men or be part of the scenery in terms of barrels and biscuit boxes and ammunition boxes and stuff like that. So bit of a look at that, and then we will come back for the spinning wheel and the photos, and then after that I'll come back and say so long. So here's my crack at the bayonet. Now I apologise, my navigating around in Tinkercad is not very smooth, so it will be a bit of a jerky journey as we go through all of these. But the bayonet itself is dimensionally correct, so I did a bit of research and found out how long the scabbard actually was. So that is a 1/56th scale rendition of it. I've taken a little bit of poetic license in putting the 24th indentation at the top around the brass, I guess where the hilt would meet it. And the affixing method, the white piece, is probably my interpretation as well, but it's hollow down to a certain extent because all the bayonets are fixed on the rifle, so you'll be able to see down, and the little hooky thing on the side is to scale as best as I can tell. So by and large, given it's my first effort, and it is not difficult software to learn, but I'm finding it a little bit difficult to just navigate around, and I think that's because I've been doing it on my laptop. So I'm going to try and do it on the desktop moving forward. I think I just need a bigger size screen because I can zip off the page and disappear like that a little bit into the distance and not find anything. So anyway, I think it looks okay. Alright, so here we've got the shoulder tabs, a sort of generic box, and also the plaque that I'm going to put on the front of the diorama display. So the Battle of Rorke's Drift, January 1879, as depicted in the 1964 film Zulu, Men of Harlech scene. So that's going to be slightly raised, and the thought would be that I'll be able to just sort of dry brush that gold and have the rest black with a gold frame. Now the 24th numbering shouldn't be on the shoulder tabs. I just did that to see if I could do it. But by and large, I'm pretty happy with those. One of the good things about 3D design, I guess, and Tinkercad, and I'm no expert, so I'm just assuming this is normal in all 3D design packages, is when you rescale. So this is 2 and a bit millimeters wide, I think by 6 millimeters long. But when I go to print it out, obviously I have to measure it exactly for the figures, but you can upsize and downsize if you like, and everything remains like proportional. Its integrity isn't stretched or squashed or anything like that, so I think that's very handy. So I'm keen to see how these come out. I might be pushing my skills and the tolerance of the printer to its extreme, because I think that's 0.1 of a millimeter in height, or maybe 0.2 from memory. So that might be at the top edge of its performance. We'll see what happens. And then Lucky Last is just sort of a generic box, so it could be a biscuit box or any sort of box, really. It's certainly not the same as the ammunition boxes there, but I just thought a few random boxes shoved into the sandbag wall wouldn't go astray. And again, the same as I was talking about with the shoulder tabs, because it's all really scalable, I can make them smaller, make them thinner, taller, longer, and for the one design, that gives you quite a few options. So, as I said, it's all geometric, so I'm not doing any massive sculpting at this stage, but reasonably happy with how that came out. So I've built the ammo box in 3 parts: the body of the box itself, the lid, and then the 24th insignia, I guess, which will go on the side. And what I thought I'd do, just to make painting easier, and part of this is also just experimenting with what I can and can't do, but I thought it would be good to have the lid printed out separately, so I can choose to have it either on or off. And if I have it off, and sorry for the horrible scrolling around the screen, I do get a little bit better as time goes on. If I have the lid on or off, then I can choose to either depict it with ammunition inside with the lid off, or have it closed, and typically it will be part of just what's lying around in the background, and maybe incorporated into some of the sandbag walls, so some boxes and barrels, and I think biscuit boxes used as part of the firing step. So that's the theory behind that. And then my thinking behind having the 24th identification numbers printed separately was I have indented where they'll go into the side of the box. So I should be able to just paint the box and then paint the 24th white separately, and then all things being equal, just push it in and basically click it into place in the exact hollow that's created in the side of the box. So again, is that necessary? No, not really. I could just make a stencil and spray paint on the 24th, but I'm just pushing the boundaries of my capability for how it might be used in the future. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, well, I can just paint them on, so not a great disaster. So that's the plan with that stuff. So I've also created the holes for where the rope handles will tie through, just to make life easier so I don't have to drill them out later. And my reference for scale is this guy, old mate, who is 29mm tall, which sort of incorporates the hats and the helmets. And then by using still pictures of the movie, I've been able to sort of get a feel for, oh yeah, there's just slightly above the knee or whatever. So that's the scaling of it. And here's a premature look at the barrel in terms of the scaling as well. The barrel was an interesting piece of work. So the barrel was probably the trickiest shape, and I guess to give you some context on how Tinkercad works, it's only got geometric shapes in it: squares, triangles, stars, spheres, the whole box and dice. And to make shapes, you're basically using those preset geometric shapes and either adding to them or taking away from them. So I found the barrel quite tricky, and I'm not convinced it looks fantastic, to be perfectly honest. I think there's probably some more work I can do on that, but I'm also not terribly fussed about it because they'll largely just be part of the sandbag wall, and so therefore won't necessarily be that prominent, and I can potentially hide any deficiencies. But yeah, I've still got quite a lot of learning to do in getting these sorts of shapes a little bit closer to the mark. Alright, so that's enough of all that. Lots of things coming in the new year once I get my hands on the 3D printer. At this point we will have a trip around on the magic spinning wheel, a few photos, and then I'll come back and say goodbye. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I just have to say it's been a lot of fun painting these figures. The Perry Miniature figures are really nice. So looking forward to the diorama continuing to unfold. So what's next? Next will be the Christmas special. So I'm just about to start work on that tomorrow, basically, once this goes up Sunday night Aussie time. And then there'll be the year in review, because I think I actually did a little bit more this year, so that will make that worthwhile, and that'll be in early January. And then we will pick up this again, where I should have, in all that intervening time, done some of my 3D printing and painted the command figures for the diorama and the rest of the men. So that will, the command figures, the build and the painting of those, I think I'll combine with the diorama base and the build of the sandbags and the barrels and all that sort of stuff. So I don't want this to drag out forever. It already feels like it's gone way too long. And that will be it. And then we'll get back to the Haledonian diorama with the Dugite, otherwise known as a Pershing. And we'll kick that off with building the first of the mini art buildings. So there's a few things on the go. And I'm keen to see how I can incorporate the 3D printing into the diorama base for the scene of the Dutch town in the Haledonian video. So once again, thank you all very much for your time and watching, and I hope you're all staying safe and well, and I will look forward to catching you in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click on the bell so you get reminders, and as you know, really look forward to your comments down below, and we'll reply to them all. So take care, guys, and I'll catch you very soon. Bye.